Welcome, everybody. Today we would like to introduce you to our project, which was started late last year and is aimed at publishing the ROM's collection of ancient Greek coins in partnership with the University of Toronto. One of the members sits here. The ROM has an amazing collection of ancient Greek coins, something over 2,000 coins which span most areas of the ancient Greek world and most time periods. It's one of the most, well, it's probably the most important collection of ancient Greek coins in Canada and is amongst the best in North America. Some of the best of these coins are on display upstairs in the Gallery of Greece, but an awful lot more of them are still in storage behind the scenes, and amazingly, almost all of them remain unpublished, which means that the extent and quality of this wonderful collection is practically unknown outside the museum. Now, the ROM has been wanting to do something about this situation for decades, literally, but it is only now, with this partnership with the University of Toronto, that we have managed to build up the manpower and the funding in order to do something about it, to finally publish these coins online and make them available and accessible to audiences of visitors and scholars around the world. So, this project has involved an interdisciplinary team, and I'm going to just introduce you very quickly to the various members. Up to here. Sorry. My name is Kate Cooper, and my specialty is archaic and Greek classical world, the archaeology and the artifacts of this. I am a ROM research associate in ancient Greece and Rome, and I am also a lecturer in the University of Toronto working on the history and the culture and the archaeology of the classical world. So I have a foot in both camps, and I really, in this project, unite the two sets of partnerships and work with people within the museum and people within the university to research the collections, publish the collections, and publicize the project itself. But I'm not alone. Within the ROM, on the ROM side, we have curator Paul Denis and technician Kei Sunohara, who are in charge of the collections of ancient Greece and Rome, and particularly the coin collection that we're working with. So they help us with access to the collection itself and to the documentation. And within the ROM too, we have a group of conservators, a conservation team. Laura Lipsey, who is here today, is ROM senior conservator and works on conserving the ceramics, stone, glass, and metal objects throughout the museum collection. She also has a background in ancient archaeology, which is useful for this project. But we have also a dedicated project conservator, Amandina Anastasiadis, who has experience in working on the archaeological excavations and conserving coins there, particularly the excavation of the Athenian marketplace, the ancient marketplace of Athens, the Athenian Agora. So Laura and Amandina are basically responsible for cleaning and conserving the coins as necessary before they go for photography, and at the same time carefully studying these coins for clues about their ancient manufacturing techniques. And finally, on the ROM side, we have our photographer, Paul Ekoff, who is about to start photographing professionally the coins ready for publication, and that starts next week. Then, on the university side, we have Ben Akrig here today, who is Associate Professor in Classics at University of Toronto and who specialises in the economic history of the archaic and classical Greek world, particularly the city of Athens. And Ben is the person who has been awarded the funding from the Social Sciences and Research and Humanities Research Council of Canada, which is helping to support this project. We also have Boris Krebezik, who is an associate professor in historical studies at University of Toronto, Mississauga, and who specialises in the Hellenistic Greek world, particularly the Seleucid Empire. Ben and Boris, in their research, often work with coins, and they are basically spearheading the research side of this project. Last but not least, we have our small but wonderful team of students who are graduate students from the University of Toronto working in classics, and who are basically helping with the documentation and updating the records in the ROM collection, but also in producing the project website. So, as you can see, a largish team, very important because it's an interdisciplinary team with experts across different disciplines and different time periods. And we are also being provided, because of this partnership, with funding, which is essential for this project. So the first 2 years of this project, until 2024, is actually taken up with a smaller pilot project, which is studying about 10% of the overall collection of Greek coins, just over 200 coins, from 2 regions of Greece, which really play to the strengths of our university professors. And this is the city of Athens, important Greek city, and the Greek Empire ruled by the Seleucid rulers of the Hellenistic period. And as you see on the map here, that encompasses roughly a large swathe of the ancient Middle East. And our project spans about 600 years of history, beginning in the 6th century BCE, so that's about 2,500 years ago. So today, what I'd like to do is give you a bit of historical background into the history of the coins, but also their use, their ancient use and production. The Greeks were amongst the first people to use coinage in a widespread sense, but they weren't the inventors of coinage. In the Western world, at least, coins were first invented just to the east of Greece in the kingdom of Lydia, which is today's modern-day Turkey, in the late 7th century BC. And the earliest coins were these lumps, tiny lumps of electrum, which is a naturally occurring mix of gold and silver. And these early coins were stamped with an emblem to signify the weight and the purity of the metal. So literally, its intrinsic value. And by stamping these coins with an emblem, the king of Lydia was guaranteeing that they were worth their weight in precious metal. So this was the earliest coins, but the Greeks very quickly adopted this new invention for their own purposes. And so now I'd like to ask Ben to give us a bit of a historical run-through of ancient Greece, talking about the development of coinage particularly.
Okay, thank you. So as Kate points out, the Greeks are not the originators of coinage, but the first coins are minted in the kingdom of Lydia in Asia Minor. But it's the Lydians' western neighbours, the Greeks, who are in many ways the most enthusiastic adopters of what is a new technology. And at this time, the Greek world is not unified. Of course, it's divided up into hundreds of smaller independent communities, often very sort of squabbling with each other, intensely competitive in their relationships with each other. But these squabbling little communities find these new objects, these new coins, very convenient for making certain kinds of transactions, and particularly the kinds of transactions that states of this period make, including, not least, the payment of soldiers. But they also find them useful for reasons of asserting their own identity in this very complicated world full of squabbling little communities. And so they stamp these objects with designs which are either sort of symbolically important to their communities or play in some way on the names of their communities. And Many dozens of Greek cities adopt their own coinages, often using their own weight standards and denominations at this time. And of course, some of these cities are larger and wealthier and have more extensive trading contacts with the rest of the world. And so some of these coinages become very important in a much wider world than the communities of their initial production. And you can see some examples on this slide. Oh, you're doing it. I'll get rid of this then. And one of these cities which is an early adopter of this technology is the city of Athens, which starts to mint its own coins in the 6th century BC. And after a period of initial experimentation, the Athenians determined to use a style of coinage which is really very striking. It looks very familiar to us, but that's partly because our understanding of what coinage should look like in this Western tradition is to some extent established by Athenian coinage. What you can see going on here, in slight contrast to the coins on the previous slide, is a full exploitation of both sides of the coin with very explicit, even sort of aggressive and assertive claims about Athenian identity, with the portrait head of Athena on the obverse, and then subsidiary symbols, but nonetheless connected to Athena, the owl and the olive branch, and then the legend, Athe, short for Athenaion, of the Athenians on the reverse. Right? And again, this is sets an expectation for what coins should look like in much of the Mediterranean and wider world for centuries to come. And again, in fact, the coins in our pockets now follow this strong sort of visual vocabulary. And part of the reason that Athenian coins are so influential is they're minted in very large numbers. And that's partly because the Athenians have access to their own precious metal reserves. They have their own silver mines. But also, do you want to have the next one there then? It's Athens. Brief moment of comedy business. Athens and its fellow southern Greek city, Sparta, are the leading cities in an alliance of a few dozen Greek cities which resist the invasion of the Persian Empire to the east in the early 5th century BC. And more importantly, it's Athens that leads the counterattack against the Persians, which lasts for the 30 years after the defeat of the Persian invasion of 480-479. And in the process of leading that counterattack, Athens becomes the center of a large military alliance, which develops substantial financial resources for the maintenance of, again, several decades of intense warfare. And large amounts of money are flowing into Athens as a result both of its leadership of this alliance and its military victories over Persia, but also large amounts of money circulating in and beyond Athens as Athens pays its soldiers and sailors to prosecute this warfare and to do other things too. So vast quantities of Athenian coinage are minted at this time, which, again, we tend to associate with all the things that we know about from Greek history, whether that's political institutions, literary forms, and artistic achievements. But over the course of the 5th century BC, what had been an alliance between Athens and Sparta turns to rivalry and ultimately to open warfare at the end of the 5th century. And between the end of the 5th century and the middle of the 4th century, the mid-400s BC, Athens and Sparta and the other major cities of the southern Balkan Peninsula fight each other relentlessly to a standstill, which provides an opportunity for a new power in the Greek world in the middle of the 5th century to emerge, the Kingdom of Macedon, led by Philip II, from the early 350s onwards. And in the 350s, 340s, and very early 330s, Philip of Macedon is able to assert Macedonian control essentially over the entire Greek world, or at least the entire world of the Aegean. And having done that, Philip's eyes turn to the Persian Empire, which is still out there. But before Philip can deal with the Persians himself, he is assassinated and is succeeded by his son, Alexander III of Macedon, whom the Romans later dub Alexander the Great because they're impressed by military conquests, who invades and conquers the Persian Empire in the space of really only a decade. And of course, both Philip and Alexander have got lots of soldiers to pay. Fortunately, again, they have got lots of precious metal to mint coins with, both of them enthusiastic minters of coins. And Alexander, of course, has even more available precious metal after he's conquered the heartland of the Persian Empire and mints coins in vast profusion in his own reign. Again, an example from late in his reign here. Alexander's empire, of course, does not survive his own early death in his own early 30s in the 320s BC. And his empire fragments on his death into a series of smaller but still very extensive territorial empires. And when the dust settles after a generation of brutal warfare across the Greek world and the Near East, the situation is such that there are kind of essentially four successor kingdoms. And the rulers of those kingdoms mint their own coinage. And they, through this coinage, again designed to pay their own troops, assert their own relationship with Alexander. They put him very often on the obverse, the head side of their coins. The portraits of gods are relegated to the reverse of coins now. Again, the gods are still there, very much asserting coinage in a Greek tradition, and still sort of really the same kind of thing, the same way of producing money. This really sort of distinctively Greek way of producing money has now spread over a much wider area. And one of those successor kingdoms is the one ruled by one of Alexander's officers, a man called Seleucus, and then his successors. And so we call this the Seleucid Empire or the Seleucid Kingdom. And for 200 years or so, this empire dominated sort of the central core of what had been Alexander's empire and much of the territory of the old Persian Empire. Again, over time, its boundaries shift. It is more or less at its largest extent. But throughout this empire, coins are minted in various official royal mints, but also local coinages are also minted by individual cities for their own convenience for financial transactions, but also asserting their own continued identity at the same time as the kingdom of the Seleucids is asserting the identity and power of its monarchs by producing its own very fine, high-quality silver coinages. And again, you see some examples here. The striking thing here, of course, again, now we no longer have gods or recently deceased conquerors. We have the kings of the Seleucid Empire themselves. Right? These are royal portraits, and one of the lovely things about the Seleucid royal portraits is how vivid and lifelike and sometimes almost unflattering these portraits, of course, are. But again, these are vital information for our understanding of how the Seleucids see themselves, how they want other people to see them, and how the economies of the royal and local civic economies of this kingdom work. Of course, the successor kingdoms to Alexander dominate the Near East through the 3rd century BC, but as the 2nd and 1st centuries BC go on, of course, the Hellenistic kingdoms find themselves unable to compete with the expanding power of a new empire, the empire of the Romans, expanding explosively out of Italy. And that, of course, is a different story. But when the Romans take over this part of the world, they are taking over a set of economies which have been thoroughly monetized along very much Greek lines. At which point I should probably stop.
Yep, thank you, Ben. And thank you for that whirlwind tour of ancient Greek history in a nutshell. Now I turn to Laura. So we're staying with the ancient context. So Laura, can you tell us a bit about production and particularly about the clues we see on the coins themselves as to the manufacturing?
Sure thing. Well, I guess the first step would be to cast a blank, or a flan, in other words, with the exact amount of weight in silver or sometimes bronze, and whatever the case. That blank would have been placed between two dies. As you see in the image on the left, there's a diagram of how this would have worked. The two dies were commonly made of bronze that were intricately carved with designs with, in this case, the owl of Athena on one side. So in effect, you'd have a sandwich On the reverse die, or the tail side, would be on top, and the obverse would be on the bottom. The obverse, the head side on the bottom, with the blank in the middle. And then this sandwich would have been struck with a hammer by hand, effectively impressing the metal into the designs on both sides of the coin at once. And it's sort of the same process that's used today, but in the ancient world, as we know, it was all done by hand. It wasn't mechanized as it is today. And if we actually look at the coins very carefully, which is our aspect, looking at the manufacture of the coins, you can see traces of the process surviving on the surface of the coins themselves, especially when things went wrong, which I'll show you in a minute. But because they were handmade, they were often imperfect. For instance, in this example on the left, you see an instance where parts of the sandwich can move, misaligning the dies, which leaves almost a ghost impression where you see at the bottom where the die has slipped. There's sort of a ghost impression of a double set of feet that's in the red circle. Or if the flan isn't properly aligned in the dies, it could be misstruck and off-center. You see Athena leaving the coin herself. You'll only see the back of her helmet in this instance. Also, in the evidence on the surfaces, we could see the technique evidence in the cracked dies. After many strikings, thousands of coins struck with the same die, over time that metal becomes worked and it gets stress cracks and opens up in the design, which allows excess silver to then be pressed through the crack. As you see in the image here, there's a raised line that's along the line of the crack in the die, which is interesting for us. And again, this coin wouldn't be tossed away because of this imperfection. It would have been kept. As Kate mentioned, the value of a coin is in its intrinsic value, in its silver, and less so the image. And then in the next slide, we see, amazingly in our collection, we have 2 coins made from the same die. And you could see in the detail that they're identical. One is a little struck off center, but they're identical coins in the detail, and so much so that they've both retained sort of an unusual feature and sort of an anomaly in this coin. The third lobe of the helmet is sort of an unusual shape in both of the coins, so it's repeated in all the coins. Also, that you could see over time, one was actually cast before the second was struck. The first coin is the earlier one, and the one on the right is the later one. And after thousands of strikings of the die, it cracked and created a flaw in the coin on the right, allowed a little excess silver to little raised relief on the cheek from a cracked die. Also, you could see the earlier coin. There's a difference in wear patterns in the 2 coins. And on the left, it's had a longer life and a little more wear. You could see in the raised relief, there's a little more definition and sharp image on the right of the incision is sharper on the right than on the left. And this is very interesting to us, and it's amazing that we have both these coins in our collection. 2 coins, actually. What are the odds of having 2 coins from the same dies? That's pretty amazing. Also, just like in today's world, there were forgeries. And, people, just like today, we want to know if what we're getting is the real deal, especially when you're trading and buying things for expensive value. These are examples of, in antiquity, people wanted to check that their coins were genuine, silver through and through. So these are examples of where coins have been struck with a chisel to see the core, to make sure there wasn't copper on the inside. Some forged coins would be filled with copper with only silver plate. So in antiquity, they would gouge them to see if they're real, and sure enough, these 2 are silver through and through. But they've retained the evidence of someone checking. And again, they continued in circulation. They didn't take them off and say, okay, these are imperfect, but because they still have the same weight that they're supposed to have, they're just a little disfigured. And so it's really interesting to see that.
Well, thank you for giving us the ancient context. And now, can I ask you to just keep going a little bit, because everybody loves conservation, to talk about what we're working on right at the moment, because we have been focusing on the cleaning and conserving of the coins before photography. And so can you just give us a very brief moment of what you're working on?
Sure thing. Well, we've Proudly, we've finished 70 of the 200 coins. And that is a painstaking process under a microscope. There's a lot of work to be done to clean these things, of course. So 70 have been cleaned, and they're about to be photographed by Paul Ekoff. And when we're cleaning the coins, of course, we want them to look their best. It's important that all the details be seen for photography and that they can be published. And we want to retain as much of the original patina as possible. If you've all seen Antiques Roadshow, and everyone knows that the patina is everything. That's where the value of something is. We don't want to over-clean them and make them bright and shiny and perfect, but just to retain that patina that tells you its age, it tells you that it's of considerable age, and there's a certain richness in that patina that we're very careful not to strip from the coins. In this case, we see on the screen is an example of a coin that several of our coins have had an adhesive on them from an early mounting technique. And you can see it's very disfiguring. You can't even see the coins after it's now discolored to this orange, shiny adhesive on the left. And on the right, we see the after. You see the beautiful face of Athena underneath the adhesive. So it's very obscuring. So we remove those adhesives and then even up the patina on the surface to have a nice finished after treatment photograph on the right. We're also continuing in our next phase. We've done the first 70 of the more straightforward treatments to get our feet wet, to say. And we're moving on to more involved treatments. And you could see that very disfiguring and very robust silver bromide corrosion is very durable, very hard corrosion, very difficult treatment to remove that without damaging the silver below. And so this is a very involved conservation treatment. You can barely make out the face of Athena on the top left, but she's there. You can see her large earring and her helmet peeking through the brown silver bromide. And on the right of that coin, you can make out the owl, but it's covered in this very heavy corrosion. At the bottom, we're also doing bronze coins. They haven't featured too much today, but we'll be cleaning them for the clarity that the scholars need, for the details, because sometimes it's obscuring lettering or important imagery.
Well, thank you for giving us a little bit of a hint as to what you're working on. So, just to wrap up, we are at the very beginning of this project, and I hope that you will be interested enough to follow us on Twitter to see more about our progress and about some other stories about the coins. Our handle is ROM-comma. Sorry. And we will have a project website coming very soon, and that will also be advertised on Twitter. So please follow us and visit the website to learn more about what's happening over the next couple of years. Thank you.